At midday on July 23, 2007, in a quiet Brazilian neighborhood, Guilherme Kuhn walked into a friend's house looking for his younger brother, Gabriel. He expected to find him laughing, maybe playing a game like always. Instead, when he opened the door, he stepped into a nightmare. His brother was there, but not as he remembered him. He was lying in the hallway and not in one piece. The scene before him was something no one could ever prepare for. How could a simple afternoon between two friends end in such horror? A viewer recommended this case to me, and at first I wasn't going to cover it, since there's plenty of videos and articles already. They all repeat the same version of events, yet the deeper I looked, the more I realized the story wasn't quite right. This is not a criticism to anyone who's covered it. Most of the sources point in one direction, and there is a lot of misinformation out there. I simply believe there is another side to this case that has not been fully explained. So even if you think you know this one already, stay with me. What I'm about to share is different, and what I believe is the truth. A quick warning before we go on. This story is short, but it is brutal. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Daniel Petri was born on May 2nd, 1991 in Blumenau, Brazil. He was the middle child with two siblings and grew up in what appeared to be a normal, stable home. His father ran a shop whilst his mother stayed at home to raise the family. To neighbours and friends, Daniel mostly seemed quiet, calm and well behaved, nothing out of the ordinary. But behind closed doors, things were different. Daniel struggled socially and emotionally. He was extremely withdrawn, and although he wasn't known to be violent, his behaviour worried those around him, enough that he was sent for psychological treatment. No formal diagnosis was ever made, and soon he stopped attending sessions altogether. By 16, after experiencing bullying at school, Daniel also dropped out of education. His isolation deepened. He spent most of his time alone in his room, watching TV and playing online games. One game in particular would become central to this story, Tibia, which was one of the early major online role-playing games. It was through Tibia that Daniel began spending more time with another youth from the neighborhood, Gabriel Kuhn. Gabriel was born on March 21st, 1995, making him 4 years younger than Daniel. But unlike Daniel, Gabriel was described as polite, friendly, and well-liked. The two had known each other for years, from playing on the street growing up, and Daniel also knew Gabriel's older brother, Guilherme, who was the same age as Daniel. In the early months of 2007, Daniel and Gabriel grew even closer through the game. They often visited each other's houses to play. Gabriel's mother was somewhat uneasy about the age difference. Her son was only 12, whilst Daniel was 16. But from the outside, nothing seemed unusual. They were simply gaming together. It appeared to be a harmless friendship. Now at this point in July 2007, it was widely reported that Gabriel had borrowed a small amount of in-game currency from Daniel, which was worth less than $2, and that he refused to pay it back. According to the popular version of events, Gabriel blocked Daniel in the game, which enraged him, leading to the confrontation. It was also widely reported that the attack happened at Gabriel's house, but none of that is true. This version unintentionally paints Gabrielle in a negative light, implying that he provoked Daniel over a petty online dispute. In reality, Gabrielle was completely innocent. The events did not unfold in this way. What actually happened on the morning of July 23rd, 2007 is far darker and far more premeditated. At around 8:30 a.m., Gabrielle's parents were at work, and his older brother, Ilerme, had left for a dentist appointment. Gabrielle was home alone. Sometime shortly after, he walked over to Daniel's house to play tibia, something he had done many times before. Daniel's family was also out, leaving only them both inside the house alone. Now this was unusual. There would normally always be a guardian nearby. At approximately 9:30 a.m., Daniel called his mother, not Gabrielle's mother, as many reports claim, to ask when she would be home. She told him that she was visiting his grandparents in a city nearby and that she wouldn't return until later that evening. And at that moment, Daniel knew he had Gabrielle alone for hours. Once Daniel put the phone down, he knew it was time to attack. Whilst they were both in the kitchen, Daniel grabbed Gabrielle and started to beat him. He hit him so hard that Gabrielle, bloodied and bruised, fell to the ground unconscious. Daniel then dragged him to his bedroom. There, the assault continued, escalating into something far more disturbing. He threw Gabrielle onto the bed and began to force himself on him. The attack was so severe that the bed sheets were covered in blood. During the attack, Gabrielle regained consciousness. He started to scream and Daniel let go of him, and they argued, and both again ended up in the kitchen. Now this part just makes me question whether they were ever truly friends, or had Daniel been waiting for an opportunity like this all along? Had he been grooming him the entire time? The way the events unfolded that day suggests planning, not impulse. If his mother had been returning home soon, it's hard to believe this would have happened. At least not then. Back in the kitchen, Gabrielle was shaking, crying and terrified, still trying to process what had just happened to him. He told Daniel he was going to tell his parents everything. And in that moment, Daniel snapped. Not out of fear, but out of pure rage and control. He grabbed a length of wire lying in the kitchen and looped it around Gabrielle's neck. Gabrielle barely had time to react before Daniel dragged him to the ground and tightened it with everything he had. At 12 years old, Gabrielle never stood a chance. Daniel was older, stronger, and filled with violence. Gabrielle fought as much as he could, but Daniel didn't stop until the body beneath him went completely still, silent. No more struggling, no more voice threatening to expose him. Daniel stared at him, convinced Gabrielle was dead, convinced he had solved his problem. And now, instead of guilt or panic, he moved to the next thought. He needed to get rid of the body. There was a narrow attic door above the bedroom doorway in the hall, and Daniel believed it could hide the body until he figured out more of a permanent solution. He dragged Gabrielle to the hallway and tried to lift him through the opening, straining with everything he had. But the weight was too much. Frustration built. He looped the same wire he had used earlier around Gabrielle's shoulders and tried again, heaving upwards with trembling arms. Yet the body refused to budge. Then a darker idea crept in. If he couldn't move Gabrielle's body in one piece, he would do it another way, a colder way, piece by piece. This decision showed exactly how far gone Daniel was. He thought if he chopped him up into smaller pieces, he would be easier to move. So Daniel searched the house for tools he could use, and eventually he found a large kitchen knife and a hacksaw. Daniel then returned to Gabrielle's remains and used the kitchen knife to start cutting at the top of the right leg, closer to the thigh, and horrifically, as Daniel was cutting through the flesh, Gabrielle once again regained consciousness. He began to scream in excruciating pain. Most people would freeze. Most would feel horror, guilt, or panic. But Daniel felt something else entirely. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill. Instead of stopping, he restrained Gabrielle and began to hack at his flesh more ferociously. Once Daniel got to the bone of the leg, he then used the hacksaw to cut through it. Once he was done, he began the same horrific ordeal on the other leg. At some point, the screams faded, replaced by silence. Whether from shock or blood loss, no one could ever say. What is known is that the scene that followed was pure horror, and Gabrielle passed away. Once the body was in two halves, Daniel tried again to lift the pieces into the small attic opening. Even then, he couldn't manage it. Exhausted and with no plan left, he simply abandoned the attempt. He left Gabrielle's remains where they were, one section near the front door and the other by the attic access. And then he walked to his bedroom, sitting in silence as if nothing had happened. The house, now quiet again, was now the scene of something truly brutal. At around noon that day, Gabrielle's brother, Ilhelme, returns home from his dentist appointment, but the front door is locked. He knows his parents will be at work, so he thinks Gabrielle will be over at Daniel's house, so he made his way there. When he opened the door, he came face to face with a nightmare no one could ever be prepared for. His younger brother lay in the hallway, brutalized in two separate parts. This sight must have been so shocking, so devastating, that words can barely do it justice. When investigators arrived, they found Gabrielle's remains in a pool of blood, and the hacksaw used to dismember him lying nearby. Neighbours had already restrained Daniel, and he was arrested without incident. He was calm, almost numb, as officers led him away. From the start, he was the lone suspect. Within just 3 days, the investigation concluded that he had acted alone. When investigators analysed the bedroom, the senior investigator called for Gabrielle's remains to undergo a full forensic examination, specifically to check for SA, as the bed was bloodied and they suspected this had happened. In custody, Daniel initially appeared agitated and unstable. As he calmed, he tried to blame the attack over an argument on an online game, a claim that likely sparked the persistent rumours about borrowed in-game currency, but records show that Daniel hadn't even played that day, strengthening the view that this was a planned attack, not a spontaneous fight. Daniel's family were devastated and bewildered. They struggled to understand the son they knew with the person the investigators described, and while lurid stories and quotes circulated online, many of them proved unreliable. It was reported that after his arrest, Daniel said, and quote, "Gabriel was a coward and a thief. He burns in hell right now, where I sent him, and when I die, I will find him in hell and finish my revenge." But this is not true. There are no reliable sources for him saying this, and is just further myth about this case. When the autopsy results were completed, it's shown that Gabriel had been forced upon, and when this was put to Daniel, he confessed to the murder in full, but denied the essay, stating that he was not gay. However, the forensic findings left no room for doubt, and Daniel eventually confessed. Because of Daniel's age, he could only be tried as a juvenile. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Every step of what happened showed planning and intent. This was never a sudden outburst or an argument over a game. This was deliberate, calculated, and deeply disturbing. On September 6, 2007, Daniel received the maximum sentence available under juvenile law at the time. 3 years in detention. That was all the legal system could give him. In 2010, at just 19 years old, he was released, a free man able to start again. Reports suggest he was given a new identity upon release. Images circulating online claim to show what he looks like today, but none have been verified, and with so much misinformation already surrounding this case, I won't repeat speculation. No one really knows what Daniel is doing now, but he is free and living his life somewhere. It seems harsh that he gets to start a new life at 19 after doing what he did to Gabrielle, but this is unfortunately the law. But what we do know is that Gabrielle was totally innocent in all this, and Daniel is a cold-blooded killer who knew what he was going to do that day. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.